Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, this is really exciting. We have some folks who are working with sport and analytics in the real world from a couple different venues. And while Megan brings them online, I just want to do quick intros for folks who may not know everybody. Although I'm sure people here know these wonderful folks. First, we have Asmae Toumi, who's the editor-in-chief of Hockey Graphs and overall fantastic human being. She also heads up the Hockey Graphs mentorship program, which connects industry leaders and data scientists with underrepresented persons to bring them into the world of sport analytics and mainly hockey analytics. And then we have Sarah Bailey, who I'm excited to hear from because she is a data and analytics analyst with the LA Rams, where she gets to do all kinds of fun stuff with data in all areas of the operation, not just maybe what we kind of think of historically with hockey analytics, what we most commonly talk about. And then we also have boy wonder, Harman Dayal, who is with the Athletic Vancouver, who, if you're not reading his work, you should. It's just some of the best work out there that is also including his own personally tracked microstats. So for those of us who've tried some of that, you know how amazing that is. Do we have everyone? I see Sarah. I see Harman and
hello.
Yay! All right. Well, we had tons of questions for you guys, so I don't want to take up any more time. I think maybe one of the biggest topics, and Sarah, we'll start with you because you have more data than the hockey world has right now. What does it really take? What are the guts of the skills and the kind of manpower it takes to work with any degree of true player tracking data from your experience?
I mean, I think our biggest issue is just organizing it. Like, how do you get it into a format where you can actually use it and you can start asking questions that are relevant and that people are going to want answers to. So our biggest problem has just been like getting the basics, like getting information out, maybe not even using full analytical models yet, but just summarizing stuff and getting that in like accelerations and speed and things that maybe might be helpful from either personnel or coaching perspective or performance. Like, how many times are we over a certain threshold in our speed, and are we optimizing that on different routes, and just kind of getting into that working format. It's a lot of data, and football analytics, it's still pretty new like hockey, so how much time you spend on each certain data piece is all relevant to how much it's used. So you want to optimize kind of your time and everyone else's time by focusing on the data that's really important and that everyone respects and wants it right now. So
Asmae, you have a great background with data science. From your experience, what are the challenges you see with this supposed tidal wave of data that definitely is coming to, at the very least, teams, if not the public right away?
Yeah, I think a challenge that Sarah touched upon is you want to go into this data with hopefully a question that you'd like to answer. And that question has to be actionable enough for the coaches and some of the other members of your team that are going to act upon it. And the second challenge is obviously wrangling that data and making sense out of it. I think that's going to require a high level of expertise, and that's going to be, I think, the challenge for teams in all the leagues, is to really find that talent that is able to make sense out of all of that.
Harman, you're tracking your own data. I do some, and I know how painful it can be. What excites you about the idea? Again, we don't know what'll be public, but what excites you about data, and maybe what words of caution do you have for people in the public space about dealing with more than just what we can get from NHL.com or even an evolving hockey type site?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing with, again, tracking data is just there's a multitude of things that we can't even imagine being able to track that we'll now have access to. And for myself, I tracked a lot of the same sort of things that Corey Schneider did, which is zone exits, zone entries. And so just having that on hand, that's going to be huge. And I think the biggest thing is just going to be figuring out what's signal and what's noise. And that's, I think, if you speak to people within the industry, everyone talks about those challenges and trying to filter that out and trying to see whether, a statistic is descriptive, predictive, what type of value it has. Because there are going to be a lot of stats where it might not tell us a whole lot as far as player evaluation. So I think more than anything for people in the public sphere, I'm first of all curious to see how much of it bleeds down and how much we'll have access to, because I don't imagine right away that we're going to have a ton to work with. And whatever we do get, I think it'll be pretty trivial stuff like player acceleration at the start. I think we saw a lot of that at the All-Star game. But once a lot of that starts trickling into the public sphere, there's going to be need to be a lot of work to see what is actually of value and what's mostly just noise.
We had a ton of questions from folks who are listening in, and we'll go through each of you on this as well. If you could maybe talk about resources that were important to each of you in working with data and getting into analytics, working in the analytics space, and then also how to learn about the analytics that are out there. Sarah, what about for you for football? How did you get not just the subject matter expertise, but the technical skill?
Yeah, I mean, I guess most of it was education based with like school and everything, but I was even joking today with a friend about how bad my coding was in school because I had to look over it. But it's just exposure. Like the more exposure you get, the better you get with all the technical skills and reading and writing, and just even if it never goes anywhere and you don't find anything, like you're still using your skill set and you're still looking at different models or different coding that can help. And maybe it's not useful then, but you might think in the future, like, hey, like I did this once before and it was really beneficial. And I think a lot of it is exposure and practice. More time you can commit to it, the better. Starting obviously with like simpler things and quick wins is what I like to call, because you can see that progression, and like everyone wants to feel a little good about themselves. So like you see your progress and you see how well you've gotten, and it's harder once you get into more complex methods. But just with coding and things like that, just find the quick wins and it'll keep getting better and better. You don't even realize it sometimes.
Do we dare open the R versus Python debate? I don't know I know where a couple people fall, but
I use R, but Python is good for some things. So I'm by no means good at Python though.
Asmae, how about you? How can people get started, not just in the language of analytics, but also the practice of it if they're interested?
Right. Yeah. I think AC Thomas earlier made some excellent points about how to get started. I think the key is to not try to go in and try to understand everything that you can. I think that's an easy way to get overwhelmed really quickly. I think the key is to watch some games or read some data-driven articles like your work, and see if there's an area of the game that you're particularly interested in. And once you identify that, make sure to check out Meta Hockey, an excellent place that has everything or close to everything that's ever been published about hockey. And, you know, if it's an article that happens to have code attached to it, by all means, go ahead and try it out and see if you're able to understand it piece by piece. I think that's really valuable for yourself in terms of replicating that and maybe even building up on that. You might, as you're doing this, you might find a novel idea or a new perspective on how to adapt that work. And I think something that I wish I knew before delving into all this stuff is knowing my learning style. And so, you know, there are people that learn better by reading. There are people that learn better by watching presentations or going through slides. There are people that learn better by just, you know, getting into the weeds of things and reading some code or executing it themselves. So I think identifying your learning style would be really helpful at the start, in also keeping you motivated as you're going through it. So. And also, I would say, you know, look for people like Alison, who are data-driven reporters, and look for people like Megan Hall, who've done just extraordinary work in terms of having these introductory articles. I think those are really, really helpful.
Harman, you come at this from a different perspective. You're a writer. What was your path to using data? Why was that important to you? And how have you built your skill set over time?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for myself was just I sort of would watch hockey, and again, I think something that a lot of people have touched on is try not to, I think, attack it from a broad, general perspective, but find something that really interests you. And for me, that was evaluating defensemen. Like I would watch someone like Chris Tanev, and you can tell he's a good defenseman, but I was trying to figure out, okay, how do I objectively prove that? Because he doesn't put up a lot of points. And so it just simply kind of started there. And then the biggest thing that I benefited the most from by far was reading other people's work. Yourself, Ian Tulloch, Charlie O'Connor, Shayna Goldman. There are just so many great writers out there that you can sort of find different people who maybe tackle the types of topics that you might be interested in. And once you read through their work and read through other people's work, you can kind of see what you like about one writer's perspective, what you like about another writer's analysis, and then you kind of learn your own style. And then from that point on, as you continue, when you first start, you make a ton of mistakes, and then the more and more you sort of go on from there, you kind of learn from those mistakes. Like I remember one of the biggest ones for me was sample size, not to draw too much out of 15 to 20 games of watching a player. So you just grow and develop from that point. But I think the biggest thing is just kind of figure out what you're really passionate about or what you really want to find out the answer to, and then find people who kind of tackle and look at the game in a similar way and sort of see what you can learn from their perspective.
Awesome. This was another question we had from folks who are tuning in. Sarah, we'll go back to you. We're just going down the line for these. Which tools, if any, would you recommend as entry-level friendly in terms of learning curve and cost? And what about finding statistics, the actual data for analysis?
I guess so. R is free and it's open platform if you want to look at programming languages, and so is Python. I think is it called Swirl or something? And there's like a learning package where where it steps through and it's tutorial based, and that's really helpful if you're just learning because it's very tells you what to do and how to do it, and you can get working that way. In terms of data, looking at different packages in if you're using R or Python, they have a lot of pre-built data tables in there. If you're looking for sports data, starting with just the summary stats, you don't need to dive into tracking data right off the bat, but go to NFL.com and pull all the QBR ratings and see, is that really reflective of who you think is a good quarterback? Is it related to passing yards? Is it related to whatever you want to look at, kind of starting with those entry or those higher level stats that you can pull, and you can manually do it if you want. You can try and figure out how to web scrape if you want to go there, but just entry level, just go to the website, start writing, open an Excel form. It might take a while, but it'll get you somewhere.
Asma, how about you? What are the entry-level tools that people can use for almost no money?
Yeah, so I'm very biased towards R. I think most sports analysts use R because it's a language that is especially equipped for, rigorous data analysis. And so I think if someone comes up to me and says, like which language should I use, I would say R, just because if you have a question or if you're stuck, then we're most likely able to help you. And if you're just starting out, a lot of these tutorials are written in R, and so that makes things a little easier. So I would recommend R. I would also recommend some free books that are out there. I know that R for data science is an excellent reference. It's completely free. Once again, I think the website is r4ds.com. I would highly recommend going through that book and some of the exercises, especially if you're looking at these hockey articles that have R code attached to it and you're just lost, you have no idea what's going on, then using that as a reference to cross-check some of the stuff you're confused on is really a valuable thing.
Harman, you're up next. What do you use? Do you go into full coding, or where are you playing with your data? How are you doing that?
Yeah, so I think for me, I actually don't have the technical skills. Just as far as coding, I haven't learned that yet. So I think just from my perspective, I think a lot of people can sort of relate to that. And for me, obviously, a lot of the public data you see from Evolving Wild, Natural Stat Trick. But what I've really found extremely helpful, and that sort of goes beyond what most people sort of have access to, is again a lot of the micro data. And I'd point to Corey Schneider's tracking project, and he has data on, I think he's tracked at least maybe 10 games or so for every team in the NHL, and you get access to zone exits, zone entries, even to the extent of like loose puck recoveries and shot assists. There's just so much uncharted territory. And so I think that was really helpful for me, where you can play around with that data and you can sort of see, and it again sort of goes back to what we talked about earlier, where maybe you can try and figure out what's signal, what's noise, because I think with the challenge sometimes with over-reliance on microdata can sometimes be that you sort of miss the forest for the trees. I think that's the saying or something. Mm-hmm. And so you can, I love to play around with that data, and even after that, you can learn to track yourself. And that's what I love doing, because you can basically answer any question you have when it comes to, for example, special teams. You can go into things like, I was really interested in looking at how well the Canucks entered the zone on the power play in different formations, whether it was a drop pass formation, swing formation. And so you can answer pretty much every one of your questions. You can use Excel, so it's very it's very user friendly, and so that's kind of the tools and resources that I kind of lean on.
I started in Excel too. We're still strong.
Yes.
For our final question, we started with this, and I'll kind of open this up to all three of you. Sarah, we started with you talking about you're still just getting your arms around tracking data. Hockey doesn't know how significant, how much of a differentiator is this going to be. Just for all three of you, how big of a deal is it going to be for teams to have this? And can teams be ready? I mean, how quickly are teams going to be left in the dust if they aren't technically prepared to handle the volumes of information they're about to get?
I think it will depend on the team. As of this point in, I don't know hockey per se, but I know that there's a broad level of analytics in team to team. It varies. And how much are you using it? Some teams are really far ahead. Some teams are in the middle. Some teams barely have a department up and running. So from my perspective, we've been exposed to this now for like the last year and a half. And the thing is you don't know what other teams are doing. You only know what you're doing. And how much is it progressing people? Well, that's a big question mark. But I do think that once you get the first initial wrap around it and you actually have a house to store it and you start looking at it, that the growth is exponential. Because as like both you guys mentioned, you just don't even know the questions that you could ask it. You don't know how you can play with it. And I know from a football perspective, one of the biggest issues is like you don't know a design of a play because you don't know the other team. So tracking data can really help see if perhaps there was a mistake from a defender or there was a blown coverage or something where you might not be able to just get that from entry level stats. So I think it's gonna open doors to different questions and different solutions. I don't think it will be as fast as people say it will until it is. I think it's gonna kind of just be steady, and then you're gonna hit a point and it's gonna grow. But that's what I would say.
Asmae, from your perspective, I mean, how prepared, do you have any read on how prepared teams may or may not be? How even that incremental growth Sarah talked about, like that's just as important as that big, boomerang at the end when you get all the results.
Right. Yeah. It's hard to say, just looking at Shayna's charts that she tweets regularly about what the analytics staff, the situation that they have based on teams. It looks like, every team has invested in analysts. And I think some of them have had experience with tracking data and are, doing great in that regard. So they'll be, a little bit ahead of the curve when more tracking data comes along. But I think the key to all of this is, and it goes back again to, I think what I said earlier is, you have to have buy-in from the top to the bottom. You know, what I worry about is these analyst teams, or departments, I should say, coming up with extraordinary work, and for some reason that's not being communicated or not being used by some of the people that are, you know, tasked with actually applying it. And so I think the smart teams will understand that and work together is to find ways to actually apply some of these findings we're finding from the tracking data.
Harman, if you're like me, we would love to get this data. What is your take on, are there teams that you kind of see and you're like, they're just going to have a field day with this? And are there teams that you think are really going to be able to make the most of this data when it comes out?
Yeah, I mean, one that stands out right away is the Carolina Hurricanes. You just see the job postings that they've kind of put up over the last year, and you can tell that they're clearly trying to bring not only just analysts, but sort of engineers and people who can sort of work with this heavy volume of data. And again, that's going to be the biggest thing, because and you talk about buy-in, for example, you're going to have instances where if they have, let's say, a bias for a player, they might selectively, you know, cherry pick stats, and sort of it might be counterintuitive that way, if anything. But I think from hockey, the biggest perspective is tracking data is going to really help us in terms of evaluating defense. I think is the biggest one, because right now it's hard to measure something that hasn't happened. Right now, the only evaluation we have of defense is trying to measure what hasn't happened, is prevention of shots and scoring chances. And now we'll be able to look at things like positioning, gap control, and it's just going to be huge for that sense. And so there's definitely going to be a competitive advantage for teams that learn to fully understand this data and learn to properly apply it in the right way.
Awesome. Thank you guys all so much. Let's wrap up quickly. Just tell people where they can find you and your work. Harman, you're on the screen, so you can go first.
Oh, okay.
Or Sarah's is. Sarah, go ahead. Where can we find your work and you?
All right. Yeah, I mean, I am with the team, so I don't NFL data. I did actually do a thread on a bunch of resources referring back to that question on Twitter, which is Sarah, Sarah Run Bailey. And you can look at that. It kind of has like the free resources that we discussed, but I try and post other things with other sports, but my lips are sealed on the stuff we're doing.
Gotcha. Asma, how about you?
So you can find me on Twitter at Asma_Toumi, and I'm also editor-in-chief of Hockey Graphs. So please give us a follow and let me know what you think.
And last but certainly not least, my tracking brother, Harman, where can people find your work?
Pretty simple. The Athletic, same place they can find your work. So I cover the Canucks, you cover the Blue Jackets. The Athletic's a place to be.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Megan, if you're with us, did anybody else have any questions before we move on to our final speaker?
I don't think so far, but it was a great job. You went over all the Twitter questions, and of course, I'm a big fan of the three of you and really excited to see what the next generation will do with analytics, because I think, you know, we can really take over.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
All right. Our final speaker of the night, who's been so patient, we appreciate it here, is Mike Johnson, who I'm unmuting here. Hopefully he's still with us. There, are you with us?
I'm here.
There you are. Awesome. Hopefully you guys all know this fine gentleman. He not only played the game, #played the game, but he is all over the TV airwaves. If you're like me and you listen to Sirius XM NHL radio, you hear him on a regular basis. Mike, thank you for your patience. Thank you for joining us. Let's maybe just start at the beginning. What drew you into what maybe is a different level of thinking the game than maybe how you thought of it when you were playing?
Yeah, first off, thanks for having me. Well worth the wait. And listen, I get to watch and listen and learn for the last couple hours as well. So it's not like I was not engrossed in what was going on. So I appreciate the invite into a community that I have a lot of respect for, a lot of time for, a lot of questions of, and one that I try to use in my job now. So I'm happy to be here for sure. As far as different way of thinking about the game now, I mean, I guess when I played, I would have thought that I was a smart player. I don't know if my coaches always thought that, but that's kind of how I saw myself. I wasn't super physical. I wasn't, particularly gifted in any one area, but I thought it well. So maybe that skill kind of has helped translate to what I'm doing now in analyzing the game. And I guess I have my own way of seeing it, and that's shaped by my own experiences, the way I see the game should be played, or I think it could be played, or where it's played best. And then, I went to university. I went to Bowling Green. I got a degree in finance, so I was always a numbers person. I was always a math person, not a computer coding person. So this whole R Python conversation right over my head, but certainly a math person. So I can appreciate numbers, and they didn't scare me, and I found them interesting. And I just love trying to find a matchup between, what I guess a hockey person might, like the way I saw it based on what I watched, and then what certain numbers might tell you, whatever those numbers might be. And I find it just as fascinating when they seem to line up. Okay, that makes sense. I guess we're seeing it the same, but it's almost more interesting when they don't. When I see something, I think this is good, and the numbers tell me it's not, then you got to dig into it. You got to explain why. And that the essence of my job, if I'm doing it the way I want to do it, is to explain why in a way that people find interesting and can understand. So it just furthers a conversation within my own self, or with people that I work with or am around, as to why things are happening on every different level, on the ice, players' decisions, coaching decisions, team decisions. And as this analytics area has grown, and I think it's accepted has grown, and it's kind of certainly public, and some private information that I have access to has grown, it just adds to more questions and more opportunities to dig in deeper, which is what I try to do.
I always joke when I talk about this, I never go up to John Tortorella and say, let's talk about Corsi, right? But what is your approach when you want to talk about the concepts that data has revealed to you with a player, with a front office executive, with a coach? How do you approach those conversations?
They're different, every one of them. Absolutely. Because players, and people always ask, like, do players care about this? Do players want to hear about this? And there are some, for sure. You have some that they might not even admit it publicly, but whether it's their team's internal stats or whether they're perusing public-based stats, they want to know. They care, and they're interested in it. But I think for the most part, when it comes to a player, you want to talk kind of his language, whether it's your thoughts that you're trying to dig into, but his language, and don't maybe lose him with either terminology or numbers that he might not be familiar with. So that's how I approach players. I approach them like I'm a former player. I want to talk about what's going on the power play. Why are you struggling? What are you seeing when you haven't scored for a long time? And then maybe introduce throughout a conversation different elements of ideas that I might have based on numbers, but maybe not just reference them in that way. Coaches, they're usually more open to it, because generally speaking, I think most coaches get some sort of packet, either on a daily basis, per game day basis, whatever it is. How much they listen to those packets, I don't know. Each coach probably is a little bit different based on the organization, but they all are aware of something in those regards. So they have probably a greater comfort in speaking that language. And so you can kind of approach them straight up in that regard. And they'll usually, if they're willing to talk about what they do internally, because a lot of it is kind of cloaked in secrecy, what their team think is important. They don't want you to know, because somehow that's going to be a competitive disadvantage if it gets out publicly. But you can talk to them however you want. Management, very much the same. Or if the manager isn't that into it personally, you might get deferred over to someone in their front office that has more hands-on knowledge or kind of works within that area. So players, though, you have to be careful, because they don't always want to accept or are open to kind of having these conversations using your terminology.
Right. You kind of alluded to this just now. I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot. Can you feel which organizations are maybe more bought in or on board with analytical or data-based decision-making? And are you willing to name them if you can?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think there's you can feel it sometimes just being around them. Mm-hmm. When you get around the teams, you get around the organizations enough, you just get a sense for everyone has, everyone seems to have a department of some capacity, whether it's 15 people or 5 or 2, whatever it might be, kind of how much authority or how much weight that department carries within the organization. You kind of get a sense of that. I think Carolina certainly is an organization that comes to the forefront when you think about teams that are not only investing in the department, but also being more willing to listen to the department. I think that's certainly one that jumps out. I know Toronto has a massive staff, but they have a lot of people working in every department. But I know Toronto has a massive staff that is engaged in this as well. So, certainly those are a couple that come to mind right away.
Final question for you. Again, you have such a unique perspective because you know how players think the game. You've played the game. What is your challenge to the analytics community? What should they be thinking about? What questions should they be trying to answer that maybe you haven't seen kind of being cooked about yet?
Again, it's a good question. I played forward, so I would probably be thinking more as a forward metrics and stuff like that. And to me, I would always be curious in how to define what makes a good defensive forward, especially wingers, because they're probably less tangibly involved in some of the statistical stuff that centerman might be. So I think, Mark Stone, maybe the best defensive winger we've seen in a long time. Dig in, what makes him so great? I thought I was a good defensive winger. I would be curious, was I? I don't know. I thought I was, but I'd like to kind of understand and be able to, yeah, exactly. And get numbers that would either suggest or refute that. I think that would be interesting. And I still think helping guys understand offensive chances. And I think we've come a long way from there in expected goal stuff and different, shot conversion metrics and stuff like that, as far as passes and cross crease and cross seam and all those different things, and what shots are good and why it's good to take point shots and why it oftentimes is not good. I think having that continue to grow and crystallize to the point where players are okay, so it's on a 3-on-2, at some point they're not thinking this during the game, but whether it's a conversation in the summer with their skills coach, with their coaches in training camp, this is what we're trying to do, this is why. And why you should listen is because you're going to score more because of this. I think once the players can buy into it as it's going to help me, it's going to get me more goals, more points, better contract, whatever, better career, more wins. That's probably when you'll get the players to become very interested in what we have to say.
This is awesome stuff. I'm going to have to contract with you to consult on my work before I submit it to my editor. Megan, did we have any Twitter questions?
I think just from my perspective, where do you think analytics will go next? You've seen it on the player side and now in media. Where's kind of that blend that, will push the future forward to make hockey better?
I think the first thing is kind of have baseball's maybe furthest along in this regard, having a broadening of the vocabulary. And I think we get lost in the minutia of of course he's if you don't it's a bad word to some people and it's stupid to others. And I think just kind of having just standardized phrasing and universal kind of knowledge of what that means. And that will take time. And that's not easy. That's not criticizing, our maybe sometimes stodgy industry or sport that we are involved in. But I think that's where the next step has to go, where whatever terminology we're going to cook up becomes more universal. And then once it becomes more universal, it becomes more accepted by everyone because they understand a little bit more. And then part of that's on people like me and people like you guys, to help introduce on you. These ideas. Not you, Megan, so much. You keep it all on the down low. But, but trying to introduce these ideas in digestible formats where it's interesting to me, where I'm trying to explain this is what we're seeing on the ice. Here's some clips, video, old school. This is what it looks like. Here's some numbers supporting what we're looking at. And this is why it all links together. And this is why it makes sense. And this is why the coach is doing this or players are doing that, and help people without overwhelming them with stuff that will be new. That's where we're going to go. And the problem is introduction of tracking. There's going to be this mountain of information that is coming at us, and how we try to filter that down to usable stuff in a broadcast, in an article, for a team. That will be a great challenge in the next few years.
And how about for visualizations? I know in Major League Baseball, they're doing now even like the swing as like a static. You can actually watch that. And there's strike zones now that are going to be automated so you can see the 3D strike zone. What do you think could be better visualized for hockey? Because I think that's a huge challenge, right? Is like, here's the data, here's what we're seeing. We know the box score, but we don't know all of the other types of data sets that could, you know, that make good and bad hockey players or good and bad plays or shots. How do you think that can incorporate with your job to kind of bring it up to that baseball level of visualization?
That's a very good one, because oftentimes I have ideas, whether it's boards or graphics, and my producer's like, nah, that's too much. Like, people don't want to do that kind of number in their head. So it has to work together. You know, I think in many ways, however you can do it accurately, like, less will be more. Like, simpler. You know, Mika earlier, I sat there through his 30 minutes, engaged, engrossed in every little hexagon and shit. Like I love that. But in a broadcast, like, I don't think you can do that. I don't think you can do that. Not for hockey. There's not enough time. Baseball, you got all kinds of time between pitches and innings or whatever you want. But in hockey, it moves too quickly. Too much is going on. So I think probably less is more, and introduce it slowly. That will be our graphics production challenge, not so much me. I'll give them the ideas. They're the ones who have to put it into some sort of template that people can tolerate on TV. And
our only other comment is, you're their favorite TV analyst. So
I didn't know my mom had Zoom. That's so sweet.
So thank you for coming tonight and for hanging out with us and waiting through all the other talks and a bit of the interruption. But I don't know, Alison, if you have any departing thoughts for Mike, but it was really great to hear from the player media perspective.
No, yeah, just echoing Megan. Mike, thanks so much. We appreciate your time and your insight. And now I'm going to be bugging you for more insight as we have this pause and see how we can move the ball forward. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks for having me. And listen, my goal next year, I got to get to one of these analytics conferences. I know Alison, you put one on. I got to come. I know work gets crazy, but lots for me to learn, but from you guys. So thanks for having me.
Awesome.
Thank you. All right, Alison.
Yes, ma'am.
So do you want to do some of your presentation? I mean, people can stick around if they want. I would love to edit it down. So I might just edit it so each presentation is different. That way we can just, you know, put it in and we can get that in too for content. Whatever you want.
But we can just, let's wrap on the evening. Mike actually said a lot of the stuff I was going to say too, much more eloquently, because he's the pro. So we can hold that for another time and give people back the rest of their evening.
Perfect. Okay, well, great. Thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you, Alison, for helping me. And sorry for Megan.
Yep. Megan, thank you. Tremendous work on your part. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.